After my return from the A-Rank gate, I decided to meet with Jinho in another restaurant. He decided to apply his next meeting with me. He eventually would have told me about his conversation with his father and about him being the guild master. Of course, I would be calm and listen to him as well, but for the first time in my life, I would be quite surprised that he actually turned down this invitation for me. Deep down, I already knew that this would happen, but I did want to basically keep my composure. But still, I didn't. I was still surprised nonetheless. Even when you have this information within me, I was still surprised that June decided to basically reject it once again. Though I've changed some events are still going the same as they should be. Though I know deep down some of the changes that I've done may have caused a lot of changes in the original timeline. Possibly maybe even making it much more dangerous than the original one. Though I have to be much more prepared in the future as well. Meaning that I'll most likely suffer from the backlashes, but I'm willing to risk it nonetheless. Since I deserve it, I've changed the timeline so much that I maybe deserve punishment, even if little. So I know what to expect and what not, but I'm kind of worried of what I think could possibly happen as well. Of course, after the conversation ended, I was still pretty shocked that even he decided to basically turn down the offer. But I was also even more surprised that he actually agreed to my offer to create a guild with him as the vice master, and me as the master of the guild. Though I was very calm and cautious, but I knew deep down that Juho did see me as a brother, and I did it to him as well. And if this was a new life for me, I did see him as a younger brother as well. He reminded me of my younger brother, though he was at least much more cautious and much more comfortable. Unlike my brother, who was kind of annoying in the past, though I did kind of miss it, nonetheless. Of course, Alan eventually would have told me if he is truly sure of what he meant as well. Of course, Joe assures me once again, saying that he will support me to the very end, with me just smiling slightly and telling Joe that I'm very happy about that, and telling that I'm very grateful as well, with Joe smiling back. Eventually, we move on to the Another's Guild, as inside of it, Choi Song will be surprised that I was actually on the mining team and they didn't even have any clue about it as well. Of course, he'll be talking with Kim Son. When Ki-hoon, of course, explaining about everything that happened inside the dungeon, with him still being shocked by over my overwhelming strength and power, even my abilities as well. He was very impressive. Of course, Joe would have also included details about how I actually was able to defeat the monsters with ease, showing no difficulty as well, with my shadows fighting alongside me, even showing immense skills, or even Choi Song being incredibly impressed. Of course, he will eventually ask Ki-hoon of how powerful does he think I am in comparison to Choi Song. Of course, Ki-hoon is of course taken aback slightly by his guild master's words, but eventually he then asks a question himself if he can actually take down a high A rank dungeon all by himself. Of course, this of course shocks Choi Song for a split moment, being incredibly impressed by my strength and power. And eventually, he then sighs and looks down. And he says, probably not. And he then sees as the ultimate hunter may possibly become a joke, since he's not as strong as he thought he was. He was basically the strongest mage type, but as I appear now, I possibly most likely have already surpassed him. And he already knows that as well. Well, the next day, there'll be reporters outside, with them filming something. Seemingly as they talk around, eventually we'll see inside the car being unknown unknown person being Limong Sun. A kind of a famous person like a model or anything like that. I'm not that versed about him that much, but he's very famous alongside wanting to basically evaluate his rank, even though he's actually evaluated already, but he wants to just show off to the people outside. He does not care as well. He's already signed even a contract with a guild that he's already wants as well. While this actually happens, two cars will appear outside the Hunters Association Guild's evaluation room, with both of them, of course, being Bake and, of course, Choi Jin. Of course, both of them were not here for Lemong's son, they actually were for me. As both of them, of course, will also glance at each other, with both of them throwing jabs at each other about wanting to recruit me. Of course, with each jab getting much more personal about either their guild or even their own reputation as well, with both of them getting on their nerves. Eventually, a person will appear as he was as you'll also be surprised that they were actually here. Of course, both of them will turn to him quite annoyed still as with their conversation. That being the Guildmaster of the Fiend Guild, being Lim Tai Gayu, an S rank as well. Of course, easily they both tell him to shut up and they don't even care about Limungsun or whatever his name is. Well, of course, him being quite surprised. Of course, Limungsun then eventually exits his car as multiple reporters take multiple pictures of him, asking multiple questions as he just waves his hand. Well, I stay on the back as I sigh to myself, saying that there are many people here today, and I was even pondering if that actually occurs in the original timeline. I guess something's didn't change even with my options that I changed as well. Well, doesn't matter. Eventually, I also realized that they're actually here for the Monk Son. Though I already expected, I was actually kind of slightly expecting that maybe they were here for me. Though I could have already guessed that they were not, since they basically ignored me like I was just a piece of air. Of course, I eventually push on the reports and tell them that I need to go through and to excuse me. Of course, they were kind of irritated by me showing them around. Eventually, one of Lunaxu's guards tries to basically stop me, saying that I cannot enter if I'm not a reporter or if I'm not here to do anything else. Of course, I was quite surprised that he decided to basically shout at me. He could have just said it to a normal person, but I guess he's quite irritated because of the reporters. But of course, before anyone can say anything else, of course, the chairman, Doan He, would eventually walk outside and eventually explain that I'm his guest. Of course, everyone would be quite surprised and shocked, with of course the monster being taken aback as well. Of course, Doan He will explain to me that that Limusu can evaluate his rank later after he's conducted a test with me. Of course, Limusu is quite surprised, even taken aback by Doan He's answer, even surprised as well that I'm disappointed to him. Eventually, both of us will decide to go inside, as of course, he will leave me inside, with me nodding calmly. Of course, Limusu will try to act cool and eventually look back at the report, saying that everything is going normal and don't have to worry about any of this disturbance. Of course, before we can actually walk inside, the agents from the association will easily block his way. Of course, he'll be surprised and ask them of why they're blocking his way, since he needed to evaluate his rank, and saying that the evaluation will start in around 11 o'clock, so they can't basically block his entrance. Of course, irritated, Jinchu tells him to just wait outside until they're done basically investigating me for a little bit and test my strength. So he can at least wait for at least a couple of minutes, can he? Of course, the Musu is instantly terrified by Jinchu's glare as he instantly backs down, knowing not to mess with him. Even though Jinchu isn't A rank like him, he has way more experience as he's way stronger as well. So Limusu decides to not test his luck against Jinchu. While inside the building, both me and the chairman will be walking inside, with him explaining about how impressive I am for my age and to be an S rank as well. But he didn't want to see how powerful I am as well, since they have heard of my abilities with my summon beasts. Of course, I'm not surprised that the chairman has heard about them. Eventually, I also glanced aside, seeing both Big and Joy Jong-in. Of course, the chairman will explain that both of them have been waiting for me for an hour. Of course, I'll be slightly surprised that they actually still decided to wait for me in this timeline, but I decided not to bother with it much. Until I heard something as instantly I get hugged from behind, being none other than Gina, one of the A-rank hunters that was actually saved from the high A-rank dungeon. Of course, she hugs me and eventually tells me that she's very glad to see me once again, saying that she basically asked for Guildmaster to accompany him since she wanted to see me, saying that she's very happy to actually meet the new S-rank hunter that appeared in Korea, and she's very glad that I decided to basically stay here, saying that Korea really desperately needs another S-rank hunters after that bastard Huang Dong-su decided to leave for America, with me actually being quite surprised as I actually didn't expect it, with me getting a slight blush, and he tells me that she would like to meet me, even go on a date with me one time or if I'm free. Of course, I'll tell her that maybe I'll do that in the future since I'm kind of busy, with her nodding and eventually wishing me good luck. Since the chairman is kind of a tough guy, but he's an easy around fella if you get to know him very well. Of course, I will nod and eventually follow the chairman inside an evaluation room, and I'll see is really open. From what I can tell, it's at least possibly almost close to a 1 kilometer radius in length. So it's pretty amazing to actually see it inside. Of course, I'll then look at the evaluator, and eventually he will tell me if I can basically summon my beast, and see how my skills are capable of. Of course, I'll calmly nod. I'll eventually summon one of my child soldiers. Of course, they don't want to show off too much, but I already know that the chairman already knows that. Eventually, both of them will actually be surprised that I'm able to summon this much. But eventually, the chairman will ask me if that's all I can summon, since he knows that this is not my limit. Of course, I will just sigh and think to myself that the chairman is really sharp, and I expect nothing less, but I was really hoping to at least not have noticed it. But I guess I should not be surprised. He is a vessel of a ruler, so it was quite expected that he would know that I have more than just one summoned beast, or shell soldier to be precise. I mentioned calm down and decided to basically show him at least slightly amount of my shell soldiers, since I don't want to show the full amount of them. Eventually, I will begin to summon multiple of my shell soldiers, AC taking both the chairman and the evaluator by shock, as both Bake and Choi Jung will of course be even more shocked as they feel the overwhelming mana coming from the room, both of them being stunned. Alongside Gina also being stunned as well, as she can feel the overwhelming mana flow coming from that room, even being surprised that actually coming from me. As I mentioned, I will summon my main shell soldiers being Igris, Tank, Iron, of course Tusk, Baruka, and I'll actually just have to keep Survey behind since I don't want to show off too much, since Survey is basically an S rank type beast. So I decided to not show him off since that would be too much for them to handle. While alongside showing off at least multiple of normal cavalry soldiers alongside some high orcs. With me explaining that I can summon at least 400 or around 300 more. Well, of course, the evaluator being incredibly shocked, being surprised that I can actually summon this much alongside 400 more. With even the chairman being quite impressed by my power, as even S rank hunters will struggle with this much summoned beast, and I'm basically handling it like it's light work. So he is very impressed. Of course, even Big thinks to himself that with my current mana capabilities, I'm most likely even above even him or even Choi Jung. With him even thinking that maybe I could possibly reach an national rank hunter if I'm able to even clear the S rank gate that happened in Jeju Island, with possibly me being the first ever national hunter to appear so fast. This has been a really long time since an S rank has appeared, and even much more longer because no S rank has appeared ever since the initial statements of a national rank hunters themselves. Of course, I eventually walked out as I would leak some of my mana, though I remained calm as I decided to consume it slowly, and of course also glance at my card as now I evaluate it as a full-fledged S-rank hunters. Of course, Big will try to get my attention, almost like Joy Jung, but I eventually told him that I'm kind of busy and I could not basically attend any meeting with them. Of course, he eventually told me if he can spare some of my time, but I told him that I cannot. Of course, Jojo and of course Bake would have wanted me to not go through there. Of course, I'll be slightly confused, but as I actually open the door, I see multiple snaps, almost like cameras shining at me. With me actually surprised and even being shocked as well, with Bake just face falling to the side. It is he expected as much. With me actually shocked and even surprised as I see that reports were still there. I actually was not expecting that. I expected them to leave it as well. To actually seeing that they stayed was much more surprising to me as well. I didn't even forgot that they actually even stayed. Of course, from the other side, the mighty team should be looking at me and sees that I actually evaluated as an S-rank hunter. And of course, the Mario who basically trying to threaten me back at the A-rank gate will easily shove down my spine as the rest will just look at him with face palm. On the other side, Joker will also glance as I became an S-rank hunter. Then the upcoming, and of course, the new S-rank hunter in Korea, with her smiling and saying that I'm really something else. And of course, from the other side, Chakayan and of course, Mr. Kim, of course, would have noticed that as well, with them being incredibly surprised that I'm actually an S-rank hunter, with of course Chakayan being impressed, with of course Mr. Song being more than even shocked as well. Of course, we then cut back, as of course, on back to another meeting, with of course Junho and of course his father. Of course, they'll be explaining about the Junho basically taking control of the Yojun Guild, but of course, Junho would have rejected it and telling that he was deciding to join my guild. Of course, his father would be surprised, but eventually decided to accept his choice, even though reluctant. While on the other side, I would still be surprised to actually see so many reports basically asking for my name. But of course, Big telling that he can basically escort me so they can get me home safely. But I instantly disappeared, shocking him as I instantly disappeared and eventually appeared from the other side saying that I'm good, and I told him not to worry about me. Of course, the other reporters and even Bake were shocked, as he did not expect that would be so fast. Even Bake was even surprised as well. As I walked back to home, I think to myself that I really need to get even stronger, since with my current strength, I'll most likely not be able to face against the Ant King himself. And I need to get even stronger. Am I even say able to even face off against Baron as well? On the other side, of course, I eventually entered one of the artifact shops, with them, of course, invalidating the over average. Being surprised that they're actually able to increase the magic capacity to 100%, with them being incredibly impressed. With me, of course, nodding calmly. And eventually, they asked me where did I get it. With me explaining that I found it in the dungeon, with them being incredibly shocked and surprised, not believing it as well. Eventually, I will ask him if they can find me an artifact. And of course, he also told me that maybe they can sell it to a premium price, and even maybe even sold on an auction for the high price, with me saying that I'll think about it for now, and eventually return the Warriors back to my inventory. Of course, I eventually would have asked if I can basically get an item which can basically make me resistant to fire or basically resistant to any fire type magic. Of course, the the person is actually surprised and shocked in it what I just said. Of course, I asked him if it's really hard to find this item, but he eventually recomposed himself as the butler told me that it's actually not that bad and told me that finding basically an artifact which basically contains an attributes for a fire type element is basically common and is not that difficult, saying that it most likely will not appear in the markets online. Me being surprised, is I actually kind of didn't expect it. I expected that maybe I could find at least one, but none was actually surprising for me. So I decided to listen to a butler as we go inside. With me also thinking to myself that I should have expected, since fire-based magic is basically so common that even some of my shout soldiers alongside Tusk can basically do it. So I should have guessed as much, but I've kind of forgotten since my memory is kind of vague ever since my new life. So I was quite surprised, though not that much. Of course, I also glanced at the different artifacts and even the armors. With me kind of being bummed out since there's so many armors, yet none of them can even compare to Igor's helmet. And most importantly, they're incredibly expensive, and I didn't want to spend that much of my money. I don't even know if I can actually sell the gold that I have in my system as well, since I cannot even think if I can even sell it or not. Of course, I eventually was having to basically leave, thinking of maybe going on, and I told the butler that I'll basically look around as well, maybe for looking out for around another item or weapon. Of course, we'll glance at one of the items, and eventually glance at it, seeing that this is very good, but it's only around B rank. When, of course, the person explained that it's around 30 million yuan, with me being surprised. Eventually, I tell him to validate this weapon if he can. Of course, tell me that the craftsmanship is very well, with me thinking that I basically buy it from the system. So I think that maybe the architect maybe have put a lot of effort into it. With him explaining that it's at least 100 million yuan, with me being even more shocked. This is basically a lot more than I basically purchased it for, with me basically purchasing it for 82.8 million gold. And it can basically be sold for around 10 times the amount, or if not even more. When being incredibly impressed, is I think to myself that I need to buy even more weapons of the item shop and sell it to its place. This can be very beneficial. Of course, I also think to myself that maybe even D rank items were incredibly expensive, as I think to myself that it could be possible. And since the upper average is basically around and goes to an S rank item, it could possibly mean that it will basically sell for around a billion at maximum, if not even more. So I was pretty impressed. Though I eventually decided to purchase some things, and eventually leave the shop. While on the other side, multiple reports will be gathered around my apartment, and of course Jinha's as well. With of course most of them being irritated that they can actually find me or get even pictures. Of course, Jinha of course glanced on the outside and eventually asked me if the reports were still outside. Of course, the reports were still able to glance at her and decided to take pictures, instantly scaring her off as she then slumps down to the ground, instantly hiding herself. I eventually asked her if I shouldn't just tell the reports to basically get her out of here. Of course, she eventually tells me to not do that. It's means that I'll most likely get a lot of dislikes and even negative comments. Of course, I'll still be confused, but I get where she's coming from. Of course, I'll tell her that I don't really care about it much, and of course, she is basically surprised at my boldness. But she tells me to at least be careful about not getting any hate comments. Of course, I then hear someone bang on the door silently, and I turn my head, with of course Jinga being slightly terrified as she glances to the side. As I open the door, my face instantly goes blank as I then see Jinho, when of course him explain that his father kicked him out. Of course, I'll just facepalm and tell him that he can stay here if he wants, I don't mind. Of course, Jinho is basically grateful, but I also tell him if he doesn't have any place for himself, with him explaining that most of the places that he has are basically under his father's name, so he cannot do anything about it. Of course, I'll just sign and tell him that he can stay here for around a week, but until then he must get his own place. With Jinho, of course, being grateful for me doing that for him. I also want him to be a separate room and he will sleep on the couch. Since we don't have any extra room except my mother's, and I don't want him to sleep in my mother's bed. Of course, Jinho understands and he's grateful for me being concerned for him. On the other side, we see as both Junho and his mother and father, as both of them have a conversation about Junho's father being incredibly harsh to him. Of course, Junho's father thinks that he was not harsh enough, but he eventually starts to feel strange as his vision begins to blur and eventually he falls to the ground. With of course Junho's mother being incredibly worried for him, asking if he is okay, as eventually he decides to instantly call the ambulance. On the other side, I will already be night, as I eventually open the room to my sister's room. Well, of course, I'll glance her calmly, and eventually think to myself that I need to get at least 2 shadow swords into her shadow, as I instantly summon 3 of the high orcs. And eventually I need to put one into Jinho's shadow and in Jinho's shadow, and of course putting the other 2 into Jinha's, since I wanted to make sure that they're at least able to protect her. I also eventually asked him if there wasn't another one with them, with eventually both of them able to point with a gesture and eventually explain to me what I did. With me just signing and thinking to myself that I was really stupid to basically put the 4th one to the wall. I should have think them a lot better than that, but I guess I let my temper get the best of me, so I guess that's on my... I don't blame myself that much. Well, that was basically 1 soldier minus, but couldn't care less. I get a lot more soldiers in the upcoming challenge that I'll face as well. Eventually, the shadow was eventually going to Jinho's shadow. Also, the one going to Jinho's shadow. Eventually, I also go outside the neighborhood and eventually decide to me possibly put some security as well. Eventually, summoning some around common to around elite level of soldiers, and eventually I tell them to basically patrol the neighborhood and make sure to not be spotted by anyone. And on the side to handle some crooks or basically rogue hunters, which will come around the neighborhood, making sure that nothing goes wrong. Of course, the soldier instantly nod and eventually disappear to a night. With me thinking to myself that only a high rank adventurer could easily defeat them, with around possibly a B rank adventurer could easily beat them, or any rank. But they can easily handle themselves even with a B rank and possibly around close to A rank hunter. Though a high A rank hunter will most likely easily able to beat them, I'm already sure that they can at least handle themselves very well, even if my morale were to drop incredibly low. On the other side, though being on the next morning, Joe would of course will be in the car and ask him if he said okay last night. When of course him explaining that he was able to sleep very well, and of course thanking me for allowing him to stay inside my home. And him of course with me of course saying there was no problem, and asked him if he found the perfect place for our guild. When of course Joe nodded calmly. Of course, I was thinking to myself that he really turned down the guild master's position for me, which is still surprising for me, but I did respect it nonetheless. Of course, June would of course try to tell me some other things as well, but of course I was telling him that I'll be right back, saying I'll need to go somewhere. Of course, June will be confused for a split moment, and now he disappear as the car for the door will be instantly shut. But June, of course, being stunned and instantly yelling, "What the?" And as I actually went inside the demon's castle, with me already getting prepared as I equip my items. As I think to myself that these items will be very beneficial when I climb to the top floors. I was also glance at another quest I have achieved. Eventually, I will open it and actually seeing that it's actually the collection of the Demon Souls Part 2. With me seeing the next items that I will receive, let me think to myself that this is very beneficial, and even more better than the previous one as well. But I also know it will be much more tougher, and eventually I will also glance at the portal to the entrance of the 76th floor. With me, of course, smiling, and I think to myself, 76, huh? Well, it's time to grind even more as well. Eventually, I'll go through inside of it. On the other side, of course, I'll then summon Tusk and give him the Orb of Avarice, as he utilizes his gigantification and he grew himself to a large size. And eventually he started to channel his magic and eventually fires an overwhelming blast of fire, instantly annihilating almost every demon as I get an extra amount of experience. Of course, I've been quite surprised, even impressed. It was a very good choice for giving Taz the above average, since with this, he's already around close to surpassing even the rank of Elite Knight rank. And I can already tell that in the future he'll most likely able to reach a general rank. I'm actually quite surprised that in the original timeline he was not even able to reach the general rank. This is most likely because of the levels he needed. He needed were too much expensive or needed acquire too much experience. So it was normal even that were not to happen. But I'll make sure that it does not happen, even after awakening as a Shadow Monarch myself. I also glanced at my stats window. I have also utilized my Devourer to basically consume some some of the demons which were basically obliterated by Tusk, and I was able to get an extra amount of mana, even with my increase in dungeons as well. With me being very glad that my mana capacity have increased overwhelmingly large. Well, outside in the emergency center, we'll see as Jinwoo's father will be talking to a doctor, with him explaining that he has been diagnosed with the eternal slumber due to him basically being in contact with people which can manipulate mana around their bodies or even being close to gates. Well, someone like hunters as well. But of course, Joshua being surprised in realizing that his son, due to him being around him so much, it must have caused this for him to basically do that. And of course, he's very irritated that he basically was struck down by eternal slumber. But this is not the end, at least not yet. While on the other side, meanwhile, on an island, of course, of Japan, there will be an ant which will appear, standing on two legs and having multiple limbs. It seems like the ants have now evolved even more, and now have easily able to cross on-site fly as well. But this is the end for this part, guys. Hope you guys enjoy this, and I'll see you guys next one. Ciao.